Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Good. How are you? I'm excited to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
I'm very well, thank you, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with you. We just had a little chat off air, and I am very, very looking forward to not just diving into the cycling aspect of things, but getting into the insights of your mind as well. So, with that being said, for those who may have not come across you or the work that you do before, can you explain a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what it is that you do?
Oh, tough question. Big one to open. I suppose it's definitely difficult to put me into one box, and this is, I suppose, much to the frustration sometimes of my girlfriend at times, where it's like you go to the wedding and people want a one-word answer. Oh, what do you do? I'm a dentist. What do you do? I'm a insert this. I went through university and became a lawyer, qualified as a barrister, or as we call them in Ireland, barrister. You might call it a lawyer if you're in the UK. I started working, so I was 1 week into that after qualifying for 7 years and spending a lot of money, as you can imagine, on law school, and decided to sack that off to take a contract for a professional cycling team in France, getting paid €200 a month. Out there, like accommodation covered, but like €50 a week, pretty grim, difficult conditions. It's where you do your apprenticeship if you're a cyclist to get to the top tier. So you can think about this like for a soccer analogy, it'd be like fourth division, and it's where you go when you're starting out to kind of earn your stripes, do the apprenticeship. The French call it le métier, this idea of working your way up. So I spent a few years bouncing around different levels in pro cycling, came home to Dublin, and I had decided that pro cycling wasn't for me. I'd had a lot of injuries, but I had found something I loved. I loved cycling. I loved the freedom it gave me. I loved the friendships. I loved the the just raw exploration. I felt like as a kid again when I was on the bike. So I wanted to keep cycling as like a common strand in my life. So I decided, okay, I'm going to be an entrepreneur, and that'll give me time to cycle. Because if I go back to law, 60, 70 hours a week, I'm never going to have time to cycle. So over the course of like 4 years, like I built a cycling coaching app, done a big fundraising round in Silicon Valley for this, built an event pre-registration platform, set up a social media marketing agency, set up a cafe in Dublin, set up a coaching company, coach like with 20 full-time staff, coaching thousands of athletes. And I just had a creeping sort of descent towards unhappiness, to the point that one day I just woke up and I was like, I'm just not as happy as I used to be. Like my baseline happiness just isn't as high. Like I've more money than I've ever had. Like not difficult considering I was making 50 quid a week, but I have disposable income for the first time in my life, but I'm just not happy and I can't put my finger on it. And I have a friend who kind of has mentored me through business stuff, and he's built some huge businesses, like, and taken them public. And I was talking to him one day and he's like, just burn it all down and start again. I was like, what? And he's like, well, look, if you don't like where you are, start again. And since that, like, this is a real Stoic philosophy now, this idea of start again, and we can get into that in a little bit. It's something I love at the moment. Like, if you're not happy with where you are, start again. And I was like, what? This is wild. Like, because I had some of the trappings of what people externally would view as successful. I was starting to make some cash, like the nice watch, I could afford the nice car. And I went to his house and I came out that evening and I'd got rid of all my businesses. Everything closed down, sold the cafe, sold the social media marketing agency, wrapped up the coaching company, exited out of the app, everything in one day, burnt it down. So I woke up the next day and I had nothing to do. So I went away to Bali and I went surfing, and I traveled for like 18 months, and I literally just said, okay, what's next? And I started with a blank page, and I kind of started from a place of, okay, what would I do if money was no object? What would I do if I couldn't fail? What would I do if, this was page one of my book and I'm the hero in this story and I get to write this amazing book, inspirational book, what would I do? And I've always loved storytelling, and that's where I started. I wanted to tell stories, but I wanted to be surrounded by people that uplifted me and inspired me. And it initially wasn't a podcast. I didn't have a concept for a podcast. I just kind of had that guiding principle, and it turned out to be a podcast. And I'm 520 episodes deep now on the Roadman cycling podcast, and just at the point where it's actually a full-time job, and it's a living now. We're starting to work with amazing sponsors, and kind of, it's still humbling to me that people tune in and listen to the podcast. It's still a weird existence, but yet that is a real job these days, apparently.
Yeah, apparently so, and a lot of us are proving that, and it's impressive that that's the step you took. And do you ever get insights into the old life that you used to have? Because obviously you took on podcasting and you've taken on coaching as well, if I'm not mistaken, and they're not necessarily always as a life as an entrepreneur. There's going to be those challenges as well. And I can imagine you're probably a similar level of workload, perhaps. Maybe I'm wrong in saying this, but it's going to be a lot of intense work to create your own business, sustain your podcast, etc. And is that ever slipping in, that past sense of I'm feeling unhappy, or is it just all happiness since you chose the right projects to work with?
Yeah, I definitely have days where I'm like, this is hard. Like I've got busy days. Like at the moment we touched on the start, my mom hasn't been too well and she's been in hospital. And, you know, the challenge with being an entrepreneur is there's no days off. There's no calling in sick to say, hey, I can't make it today. The work needs to get done. So when you throw something extra in, like hospital visits and picking up some slack and being the man around the house at home, you know, there's extra stuff in your day and it pushes you to the point of breaking point. But I love it, like, and I wouldn't change it because I get to, you know, chat with my idols, guys I grew up watching on TV. I get to chat with them and become friends with them and build these amazing relationships and talk about cycling. And, you know, getting a chance to explore amazing places. Like I was over in Iceland racing 2 weeks ago and like racing through volcanic ash and through glaciers. And I never would have got a chance to do that. So yeah, there is times where I think, okay, I went into law for a reason. I love the idea of advocating and giving a voice to somebody who doesn't have an ability to stand up for themselves or speak for themselves. It's like the idea of, I'm not sure you're dynamic in school, but there's always the kids who got picked on in school. And I always like to kind of, you know, advocate or stand up for the kids who got picked on. It turned out I was quite good at sport in school, and sport was like almost a currency in the working class school that I went to. So I had a little bit of street cred in the school because I was the best soccer player. And so it was nice to like stand up and advocate for someone who maybe didn't have a voice or a means to do that themselves. And law for me was the expression of that. And at times I wish I was still able to do that, but it does come at a cost, too big of an opportunity cost. It's like 60, 70 hours a week pursuing just financial gain, really. And for me, if I look at my life, you know, there's 4 or 5 different areas in my life that I value. Like I value family. I value, yes, financial is important to me. Spirituality is important to me. Sport's important to me. Self-progress is important to me. Relationship with my girlfriend's important to me. So I have 5 or 6 areas. And then I look at my weekly available time. You know, I've got 70 waking hours maybe. Like if I spend 90% of those 70 hours just chasing financial, it doesn't leave me a lot of space to be a good family person, to spend time with my girlfriend, to work on my own spirituality, to, you know, look after and fill my own cup in terms of self-progress. So it's just, it doesn't make sense and it doesn't line up in the sort of current paradigm that society's built.
It sounds like you've got your core values in place, and I'm always a big advocate of saying that values don't necessarily make the decisions easy, but they make the path very clear in terms of how you want to spend your time, how you want to distribute your energy. And ultimately, once you determine what they are, it's just a case of making sure you're saying yes and no to the right things, rather than getting caught up in things like, you know, prioritizing the financial over family, for example. And I think it's quite a balance, to be completely honest. But once you get those values set in place, it does tend to take care of itself, I would say. Would you say that's been your experience as well?
Yeah, that's a nice expression. I like that. I haven't heard that one before. Yeah, I think so. It makes stuff like I could be offered a job for, you know, I won't be, but I could be offered a job for 700,000-800,000 a year next year. But if somebody says it's 70 hours a week, it doesn't become a discussion because it's just like, it just doesn't fit. It's not like oh, can I make this fit? Like it doesn't fit. Like there's no possible way that fits. But it's also like, what does your vision look like for your perfect life? And trying to move towards that. And my vision for a perfect life doesn't involve sitting in a 200,000 euro car in traffic to go into an office to solve someone else's problems, to come home in traffic and have my residual energy spent with the people I love. I want to spend the bulk of my energy with the people I love, not my residual energy.
So cycling, it's something that is pretty damn time consuming as well. So you mentioned you were racing in Iceland a couple of weeks ago. How are you factoring that in with the intense demand that takes on your time as well?
Yeah, so cycling has been of a complicated lifelong dynamic with the bike. It's been so many different things to me at different points in my life. Like most people cycled growing up at some point. And for me, it was like, you know, when you're a kid and like the end of the street was some sort of magical boundary fence we had where my parents would be like, oh, you can't go past the end of the street, but somehow you got a bike and now it's acceptable to go past the end of the street. So it was, you know, early days cycling was the ability for me to go to the town over. and to have kind of, summer long romances that you wouldn't have had if you were otherwise confined by foot. And then through college, it just became this amazing like kind of reprieve for a window, which I could kind of abscond from my studies and responsibilities when everyone else was stuck in traffic. I was kind of just slaloming through traffic, and it was just such a relaxing, meditative way to commute in and out to college. And it went from a 2-hour bus ride to a 25-30 minute cycle. And that was my first kind of serious introduction to it. And then it was like a tool for me to earn a living and see the world. And I've had to re-find my relationship with the bike. Although I've always cycled, I've drifted a little bit like without purpose on the bike at times. And I was using it maybe just as a social tool to catch up with friends and go for a coffee. But in the last few months, I've kind of re-found the high performance end of cycling, where I'm back kind of looking at events, and I'm back maybe training roughly 20 hours a week on the bike at the moment. And I've kind of had to reimagine how I structure that, because I can't get out in the morning for a 4-hour spin like I used to when I was a pro cyclist. So I have to, for example, this morning, I rode for 90 minutes. I woke up, recorded a podcast, rode for 90 minutes, came home, had some lunch, caught up on some work emails. We'll do this podcast. We'll ride for 90 minutes again after this interview, and then into the hospital to see my mom this evening, and then come home and record my podcast for tomorrow later on tonight. So it ends up being a full day. But you can kind of, like, if someone asks me, like, have you seen the latest show on Netflix? I'm like, I'll stop you there. Like, I haven't. Like, I haven't seen what's on Amazon Prime, Netflix, Apple TV. I don't know any of these shows. I just don't have time for it, but I wouldn't change that. Like, I like to socialize my friends on the bike, and it's kind of my way of, filling my social cup and exercising at the same time. And then for my more sort of purposeful, intense type sessions, I will do them at home on an indoor bike, and they'll be a little bit more structured, and they aren't as social, and they're more difficult to do in traffic as well. So the indoor bike suits better for that, and it's a little bit tidier in terms of, like, for cycling, depending on the weather, it can take you like 15-20 minutes to get kitted up and get ready, and then the same to kind of get kitted down and ready. But the indoor bike, it's just like throw on a pair of shorts and you're good to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are your long-term ambitions with cycling now that you've re-entered the arena from a performance perspective?
So I'm going to try and gravel is an area in cycling that has kind of exploded in the last 2 to 3 years, and it's really driving the cycling industry. And it's an alternate to the traditional pathway of the only destination in cycling was World Tour cycling. That's like Premier League of cycling, and that's on the road, and that's the races, the Tour de France, the Giro d'Italia. Most people know these races, but gravel is a different type of race. So there's a high performance end to it, guys at the front there racing, but there's also like, I went to Iceland last week or 2 weeks ago, and I had a problem with my bike, which I was in the front of the race, had a problem with my bike, got stuck in one gear for the rest of the day. And then the race changes and it becomes a participatory type race, where it's more about, they say, the spirit of gravel, where it's more about getting through and the journey and the stories you tell and the adventures. So if that same mechanical problem happened in a road race, it's like pack up and go home. But if the same problem happens in a gravel race, there's so many people, like there's 800 participants in this race, and they're all at varying levels. So it's like, find your group, have some fun, stop midway through. Instead of having a can of Coke to recharge, maybe have a beer to recharge, and it becomes a totally different experience. So it's something I'm really interested to explore. So I'm going to race start of September. I'm racing in Badlands in Spain. So it's like a 750 kilometer race across Europe's only desert. So I think last year's winning time was like 59 hours. So that's going to be exercise and sleep deprivation, which I haven't experienced before. So it's just stacking these new experiences.
Does anyone ever say that you're like a young Rich Roll? That's what you remind me of.
Rich Roll is someone who's been super... I don't actually listen to his podcast that much, but he's someone who's influenced me quite a lot. I went to see Rich Roll speaking in... Well, I had a Canadian girlfriend like back when I was in college, and I visited her in the summer, and Rich Rowe was speaking about a vegan lifestyle, and I was like climbing the ladder and cycling, and I was looking for any little area to sort of where I could niche out a little bit of extra performance. And he was talking about the anti-inflammatory benefits of a vegan lifestyle. So I actually changed to vegan lifestyle on rest days. And I don't know, difficult to say if I got any performance gain out of it, but it was my first introduction to Rich Roll, and I followed him after that. I find it interesting to do it.
Yeah, I listened to his audiobook and I go in and out of his podcast, to be completely honest. There's times where I'm like, yeah, I'm really, really into his podcast. And there's other times where I park his podcast for months on end. But like you said, he's a very, very interesting individual. He's got some obviously very concrete beliefs on the vegan lifestyle and everything along those lines. So sometimes you have to take those with a pinch of salt. But at the same time, yeah, it does. There is some comparative type of ideas there, especially when it comes to the kind of, and I want to use this word kindly actually, the obsessive nature behind what you do. I noticed that he's high energy, he's high sprung, he's got a lot of different projects, but he's also grounded in reality at the same time. And I'm curious to understand a little bit more about yourself as well, because it doesn't sound like you do things in halves. You don't set up a cafe, a business, well, several businesses, and then go all in on a podcast and, try to hit the heights of professional cycling, all in one. Well, most people don't anyway. So I'm curious to see where that all become, kind of that obsessive personality in regards to things that you genuinely enjoy, such as the cycling, but also things that it sounds like you don't enjoy too much in, the law side of things, the entrepreneurial journey at times. So where does that come from and how do you manage it these days?
I think I try make decisions, and for better or worse, a lot of people kind of maybe drift at points in their life and they're like, oh, I'm not really sure how I got there. I just kind of drifted down this path. So I was always conscious when I've been fascinated with people's behavior. And I remember taking a psychology course years ago in university, and I was just fascinated by human behavior. And I always observed that people are like, oh, I don't really know how I got here. Like, I'm 50, I'm in this job, I'm in this house, and I never really chose that. And that always scared the shit out of me. And I was like, okay, I'm never going to not consciously choose my own path. So I've always tried to make hard decisions and audit at points in my life. And, the calendar year is an obvious one, or your birthday is another obvious one where you go, okay, am I in a place where like I like my life? Am I moving towards something? Actually, it was funny that we talked about Rich Roll. I did listen to his podcast for the first time. I put a sauna into my apartment, and so I've been playing around listening to a little bit more podcasts in the sauna in the evenings. And I listened to Rich Roll last week, and he had this idea of people have a vision that they're going to be surrounded by their loved ones in their old age. And, as you come towards your twilight years, you're going to be surrounded by kids and grandkids in this loving environment. But they never reverse engineer that to think, okay, well, I'm 50 years old now and I have no relationship with my son. I don't have any grandkids and I have no circle of friends. Like, where's this magical, grouping and coming together of people when you're 80 going to happen from? So I've always been good on reverse engineering stuff and going, okay, well, what's the destination look like? And then auditing my behavior and go, okay, well, if that's the destination, are my current habits aligned to get me there? And I think so much of that comes from cycling. We're so performance and goal orientated in cycling that at the start of the season, as a aspiring pro, I would have said, okay, I want to get a podium in the national championships, and that's in June. Okay, so if I want to do that in June, where does my fitness need to be in May? I'm not going to be, not finishing races in May and then suddenly come out of the woodwork and get a podium in the national championships in June. So I need to be getting top 10 in regional races in May. And then you take that back to April and go, okay, well, if I'm going to get top 10 in regional races in May, well, where do I need to be in April? And if you keep reverse engineering that all the way back, you go, well, what do I need to do like today? What do I need to do like right now? What needs to happen in this next 60 seconds to start calibrating me? And in that way, you can set up like a domino chain reaction where I only have to do the next thing and keep doing the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And it should take you to your ultimate goal. So I've always tried to do that in, professional, personal, even relationships, and say, okay, is there alignment here?
Yeah, it's an interesting way in which you break down those things that sometimes can't be quantified. Like, I've spoken to my therapist in the past, and he's like, you can't think about a return on investment with the time that you spend with your friends. I'm like, well, like, if I'm investing these 2 hours, what exchange am I getting back from this? And he's always, keen to explore that idea, but also challenge me on doing that. But it's interesting you've been able to apply kind of a more analytical mindset to all of those different type of areas and to break down, okay, well, how do I need to be distributing my time? And I guess it comes back to values and, like you said, the domino effect as well. And I heard you mention a domino when it comes to your podcast and the purpose you've got now, which is helping people improve their health, happiness, and longevity through cycling. So how does one do that?
So I kind of had this idea that there's the stoic term of health is the invisible crown we wear on our foreheads, but only sick people can see health. So I have friends who are legitimate billionaires. They've taken companies public. They've built some of the biggest companies in the world. And I have friends who are unemployed. And so I have friends on this wide spectrum. And again, back to observing human behavior, I've seen almost no correlation between income and happiness. So I was like, okay, so like everyone is maybe chasing this mirage in the distance that I'll be happy when I make six figures. I'll be happy when I make 10K a month, 20K a month. And it just becomes this moving goalpost. And I was like, what? Observing my friends and people that, you know, they're 10 years ahead of me, 20 years ahead of me, 40 years ahead of me. The people that are super happy are the people that are very healthy, regardless of income status. So I was like, okay, well, health is the domino here. It's not wealth, it's health. And like I have friends who are 82 years old and they ride with me on a Saturday and we'll ride like 100 mile on a Saturday, 82-year-old, and he'll be unbelievable. Like if you look at this guy from the waist down, you'd swear he's 16. Like his legs are tanned, they are shaved, and we're sprinting into the coffee shop and it's like the 82-year-old at the front. And I'm like, this is amazing. It's inspirational. And he's the happiest guy I've ever seen. Like I look at my dad, he's like not 70 yet. And like he struggles with mobility to like, you know, walk for 10 minutes. And I look at this guy 82 and I'm like, okay, well, there's something in this. So the podcast really became my personal quest for, you know, the answers to how do we improve health, happiness, and longevity. So, you know, there's a long tradition of, from all the way down from Roman times, where I'm actually just, it's not me that has all the answers. I'm trying to bring together the experts that do have the answers. And somebody might have an answer that's quite instructive on strength and conditioning. Or maybe I bring in 4 different strength and conditioning experts, and the audience get to say, okay, like here's some merit in person A, person B, and person C, and now they form their own hypothesis about strength and conditioning. But there's not that many aspects. If we deconstruct what health is, there's not that many aspects, whether we choose cycling, running, weightlifting, CrossFit, whatever that modality is. Like we have stuff that we'll universally agree is important, and then stuff we'll say, okay, maybe you might add extra significance to some aspects than I will, but most reasonable health practitioners will agree nutrition's important, some aspect of strength training is important, sleep is important, mindset is important, endurance training is important. And then it's like, okay, well, how do we, and I would say stress reduction is important. You know, maybe that's one of the ones some people would debate on it. With stress reduction, I'll put in stuff like meditation, sauna, journal work, therapy work, reading, self-reflective time, even red light therapy, which I'm finding brilliant at the moment, like photobiomodulation. I'm not sure if you've played around with that much, but if we take those 5 or 6 different elements, like for me, that goes to making up health. So the podcast is really conversations around those 5, 6 areas. And I think there's a body of knowledge there that if somebody listens to the podcast, they don't need to pay these really expensive, you know, consultants to get health. Because for a long time, we've seen health guarded by the, you know, superstar athletes, Hollywood elite, and then it's trickled down. And by the time it gets down to, you know, my friend that drinks in the pub on a Saturday night and he thinks fish and chips is healthy because, you know, chips are potatoes and fish is in the sea, so that must be healthy. You know, but there's been a disconnect there for so long, and health is broken down across socioeconomic lines. And you look at obesity levels across, you know, working class areas, and they're a lot higher than in affluent areas. So it's just trying to break that paradigm and almost democratize health and how we create and sustain health.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting when you do look at it from that perspective. And obviously part of it's education, but then there's an economical factor to it as well. And that's one of the big things that drove my podcast as well, is that, of course, we both, you know, have offerings of coaching as well, and there's only going to be a certain amount of people who can reach that, whereas with the podcast, the amount of information that's available, not just on yours but many podcasts out there that you can gather a lot of information from, it does make it a little bit more accessible. And as you've mentioned, it's been guarded for so long, but now it's starting to trickle down to the masses, which I think is an amazing job. And on the note of that, and whilst we're still on the topic of cycling, I want to talk about how someone who's maybe piqued their interest and maybe wants to get started, where do they start with that? And also another personal question as well, if you are to start late in life, is there any chance that you're going to be able to perform at a high level, or is it something that you have to get into quite early, which seems to be the case with a lot of sports?
So yeah, getting started, to take the first question first, getting started super easy now. When I got started in cycling, it was like Tyler Durden Fight Club, where you'd gather in behind a bar late at night and nobody really knew. It's like, no, don't tell anybody about this. The first 7 rules are don't talk about it. But it's super available now, you know, depending on what part of the world you're listening to this podcast. But in the Western world, you're going to have group rides most Saturdays and Sundays, starting from your local bike shops. So it's your local bike shop is it's a challenging environment for local bike shops because, like any business, they're really under threat from online retailers. But the local bike shop is, in Western communities, still like the nerve center, the community for local cycling. It's where group rides happen. It's where the conversations happen. And they are the best place to plug in. And once you're in the local club ride, you know, that then you start getting introduced to this pathway that's within cycling where, you know, you can go and do gravel stuff, you can go and do sportifs, which are just for fun, or you can get plugged into the racing side of it, where it's a categorized system where you start out in category 4, then category 3, category 2, category 1, and then into the pro ranks, and then that has its own internal categorization as well. So there's a very laid out pathway, and I think that's where the goal focused nature for me comes in, because I literally had printed out in my diary and glued in when I was getting started, like, okay, this is the pathway. It's like Cat 4. How do I get from Cat 4? Okay, I need to win 2 or 3 bike races, and now I get to a Category 3 license. Now I need to win 4 races, and I get a Category 2 license. Okay, now I need to win Category 1 races. Now I need to win an international race to get a chance at a professional contract. Now if I win this professional race, I can get onto a national team. And, you know, you have your pathway very lined out, and so you just break it back down then to, you know, what's the actions that I need to do today to do that. And then, is it possible to compete at a high level? I suppose it's defining what a high level is. It's like, if you want to win the Tour de France, it's getting more difficult. The culture is changing. We're seeing 22-year-olds winning the Tour de France at the moment. For this the 3rd year in a row, we're seeing somebody under the age of 22 winning the Tour de France. So it's getting super young. But having said that, there's a big spread. One of the best riders in the world, Alejandro Valverde, is he's 42 years old and he's still racing. So we're seeing this big spread in cycling that we're not getting in other sports like soccer. It's a sport you can sustain for a long time. And I've seen friends coming into the sport late, you know, early 30s, and gone on to win national championships and, you know, become the sort of local fast guy, and then sustaining that into their 40s. So it's possible to come in late and achieve a high level, but maybe to achieve the top level of the sport, difficult.
Interesting. That's good to know. And how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 36 now.
Interesting. So still some years in you.
Yeah, like definitely not the high performance years. I think my international racing is probably up. It'll be more for, but also your motivation changes. So I'm not, so much goes in. I went back 2 years ago for an Olympic cycle with a friend. It's actually a funny story, or not that funny, but interesting. A friend of mine, he lost his eyesight when he was 18, and he'd be a cool guest for your podcast. Peter Ryan is his name. He lost his eyesight when he was 18, and he was over in Ireland, we have a sport called hurling. It's like our native sport, and outside of Ireland, this makes absolutely no sense. But it's so popular here. Like, we've 95,000 people like going to the matches over here. It's like fanatical. So he played for the best hurling team in Ireland. So if you play for this team, this is like, you know, it's like playing for Man United. You're absolutely idolized. So he was playing for the best hurling team in Ireland. You know, 95,000 people at these matches, and you know, it's bigger than the Bernabeu, our stadium over here. And then he loses his eyesight. And so he's gone from being this superstar to losing his eyesight. And he went through a really difficult decade of addiction, antisocial stuff before getting back on his feet, qualifying for the Olympics. And then coming to the end of my cycling career, I'd actually retired and then I came back. He said to me, hey, would you pilot the tandem for me? And he wanted to qualify for another Olympics. So I went back onto the front of the tandem for him, but that was back into high performance. And that's only 2 years ago. And I was like, I only done it because he was a friend. The high performance is, you know, it's not that much fun. There's no balance. You know, it's going to Spain for 4 weeks for a training camp, coming home for 4 days for Christmas, and going back to Portugal for 4 weeks for a training camp, coming home for 2 days, flying to Toronto for Worlds. It's full on, and you have to have a very big, like, why am I doing this? And for me, that was my buddy to help him qualify. But like, I don't think I could have a why big enough to shelve the rest of my life. It's a young man's game for sure. When you don't have many responsibilities and you don't have many goals other than sport. I think that's the time to pursue high performance. But maybe when you're into your 30s and you have other interests, and like the podcast that I'm trying to go and that's grow, like that's where I like to put my creative energy at the moment. And when you're high performance in sport, there's not a lot of residual creative energy to push a podcast.
No, and it's interesting. It's like when you see the highest performers and you see the athletes and you see everything that they gain from the lives that they lead, it's very easy to think, I wouldn't mind a life like theirs. And then you actually see the reality of what a life like theirs looks like. And most people would not exchange it for all that they receive from it. So it's very interesting that you have that perspective as well.
And what's interesting in this as well, because we're starting to see more about these athletes. Like if you look at Michael Phelps, so Michael Phelps is the most decorated athlete in Olympic history, more gold medals than any Olympic athlete ever. And after his last Olympics, which I think was London, he spoke openly about suicidal ideologies, being lonely, isolated, depressed. So, like, is that what success looks like? Is this what we should strive for? Because any rational definition of success, it can't be that. It can't be, because what makes these athletes great is also what breaks them and what isolates them. So we need to find more balance, because that can't be the ideal that we're striving towards. Is the amount of sacrifice it takes to win that many gold medals is also what caused him to have no friend circle, to cause him to be totally isolated from his family, to have a dysfunctional relationship with food, to have an obsessive nature with training. And then when all that stops, he contemplates taking his own life. Like, we can't call that success. We need to do better as a collective at defining what success is, especially for kids coming into the sports.
Do you think he was able to achieve that balance and still hit the heights that he did?
I don't think so.
No, and I think that's the challenge, right? Is that we, as a society, praise the highest performers, right? We want to see people at the top of their game. And I think that there's, as you mentioned, there's more that we can do. And then perhaps there's a bit of a, I don't want to call it a healthy ignorance, but maybe a blissful ignorance is probably the better word, of what these people are having to do in order to create the type of achievements that they are. I mean, we all want to go watch, the 100 meters at the Olympics. We want to watch the World Cup final. We want to watch who's getting gold at the Olympics, but we don't actually think about the sacrifices. We just applaud the merits of what they're able to achieve. And I think that that's the challenge. It's that if someone says, yep, we're going to strive for more balance, and, these people at the top of the game, they start to slow down. It's like, well, other people who are still in that mindset, who are like, well, actually, I don't want balance. I just want to be at the top of my game. Are going to take advantage of that. And so I think that whilst we have a competitive world like that, I don't personally know what the solution is, or I'm not sure if I've had an idea of it. Do you have any idea what a solution might be?
I think the solution is like we're doing right now. It's to start the dialogue on it, because for so long we have, celebrated. Are you a football fan?
I am, yes.
Yeah, so for so long we've celebrated like Diego Maradona, Paul Gascoigne, all these generational icons. Over here in Ireland we had Paul McGrath, and we've celebrated them on the one hand, and then we're totally dismissive of the addiction problems they have on the other hand. But it's like these addiction problems are to, like, Paul McGrath spoke of getting into his car, drinking a full bottle of whiskey and driving full speed towards a brick wall to end his life, and then waking up and, like, obviously didn't die, woke up with like bad injuries and has to go to the hospital and be treated for it. But this is a product of the system that creates these athletes. It's economics, they call it an externality. It's an unwanted side effect of the systems we've created to make high performance athletes. But we just want to totally, we want to be ignorant of it, but also look at it in almost patronizing terms. Or like, isn't it so sad what happened to Maradona? Isn't it so sad, Paul Gascoigne? It's a tragic story. It's not sad. It's a natural consequence of the systems we've set up.
It's really hard to find a solution to that. I'm really struggling to think of a way in which we could have a world in which that imbalance is eradicated without there being competition. I think ultimately there's competition, there's imbalance.
Well, I think if you circle back to one of our early points on it, we talked about values. And I had a psychologist on my podcast called Dr. Martini, and he talked about values being like compartments in a ship. So if you have, say, we arbitrarily threw out, family, spirituality, financial, self-progress, and, maybe sport as our 5 areas. So if you think about them as the 5 compartments of a ship, So for me or you now, not, I'm assuming you're not in your 20s anymore either.
I am. I'm
Are
in
you
my
still in
late
your
20s.
20s?
See,
What are you?
yes. 27, turning 28 very soon.
It's the bad light. It's the bad light. So, we have those 5 areas, but so now you're maybe at a part of your life where you're starting to try and get those balanced rather than being all in on one area from chatting to you. It seems like you are anyway. But so when one of those areas starts going bad, like if your sport starts going bad, you don't say, my life is bad. You say, okay, one area is going bad, but I still have 4 other areas to keep the ship buoyant. But if you take the Paul Gascoigne example, you take the, Tony Adams, the, Maradona example, when they come towards the end of a career and football starts going bad, they've only one compartment in the ship. So football's gone bad equals life is gone bad.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. We're not creating rounded athletes. So it's like the systems we're building need to have more balance built into them. It needs to be creating like multi-dimensional people instead of just solely athletes.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that we could probably go back and forth for hours because I also imagine that, like you mentioned, do you think Michael Phelps would have done it without all of that? I don't think he would have done. And a lot of athletes, I'm sure, on the way up will be like, I don't care for spirituality. I don't care for these other relationships. I just want to be the best at football, cycling, X, Y, or Z. And I'm willing to take all the sacrifices that is possible. And even if we have a system in place to do that, if at the end of the day it's the athlete's or individual's decision and there's advantages to be taken from solely focusing on one place and we are able to be rewarded financially, socially, and societally, I can only see the problem continuing.
I think there's a happy medium probably somewhere, and we won't find it in this conversation, but I have seen athletes that are so all in on their sport that when it does start going bad, as we say, life is going bad. But the other athlete that has, something on the side, they have a hobby on the side, when they have a few bad performances, it doesn't derail them completely. And they're still able to, keep themselves together because other things in their life are going well and then actually get back on track with their primary sport. Whereas the person who slightly comes off the track, they're derailed and they can't get back on. The other person can refocus, and just because it's a bad season doesn't mean it's a bad career. Now I can refocus and next year I become a better rider. Whereas I've seen guys they can't take the stress, they can't take the pressure because it's their whole life. And when they have 1 or 2 bad results, it becomes a bad season and it's retirement, done. And it's like, you're 19. How do you mean done? Like,
yeah, it's a tough equation. I can completely see where you're coming from, and it's definitely one that I would like to dig into a little bit more. But I hope that there can be something done because obviously we hear about the Diego Maradonas and the Tony Adams and people who actually achieve a great deal of success in their sport, but there's also a lot of those people who actually didn't quite get the achievements right because they were unfortunately ended up with a lot of injuries and they had the performance to reach those heights, but they had that single obsession, but they didn't quite get the accolades, right? When you look at someone like Michael Jordan or you look at someone like Diego Maradona, like they'll be praised for as long as the history books remembers them, but there's probably a large portion of people who didn't get any of the accolades but only got the downside of that, right?
Yeah, for sure. Kat Bishop, someone I've had on the podcast as well, she's a GB Olympic medalist and world champion in rowing, and she's written a brilliant book called The Long Win. She'd be a fascinating guest for you, but her book as well worth checking out as well.
Yeah, and on that note, I want to go into a little bit more of your mindset, and Stoic philosophy seems to be something that you lean on a lot, and it takes a lot of my interest as well. So I want to understand where that first came into your life, how you apply it to your day-to-day, and also the cycling that you do as well.
When did I get interested in Stoic? I've always been interested in reading. I've been like kind of that quest for knowledge. I've read very little fiction in my life, but I'm always like, I'll try and get through a book most weeks, and I've kind of circled on many different theories and philosophies and been fascinated with religion and why people subscribe to, certain tribes for a long time. And I can't actually remember. It was probably in university when I first read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and that was the first kind of book that got me interested in Stoic philosophy. And as I've journeyed through life and kind of had different diverse experiences, I've often referred back to books to kind of backtest and said, okay, well, my experience totally doesn't line up with this philosophy. But anytime I've backtested experiences I've had, or, my current values or principles, when I backtest them against Stoic philosophy, it always seems to line up quite well. And one we're talking about off air, my mom not been super well at the moment, and the Stoics have written extensively on illness and how you deal with illness. And they have this idea of amor fati. It's like a love of fate. So whatever comes your way, you have to try and make the best of it, because stuff like anger, resentment, sadness, depression, none of them are very helpful emotions. It's not going to change the reality that somebody is sick. So it's, even though the situation is incomprehensibly shit, it's like, well, how do we pick a small little strand of goodness from this shit situation? So the only strand I've picked from my mom being very sick at the moment is it's strengthened the relationship with my dad. And it's difficult and it's not ideal, and people say it's, it's almost, you can't pick any positivity out of a situation like that, but it's the only way you can move forward. There's not a better system for moving forward, and that's what I mean by backtesting it. Like, I agree with a lot of the Stoic teachings when I encounter stuff like this in my life, and it suits my personality and it suits my visions and my values. That's not to say it will suit everyone's. Other people might say, I want to just be depressed out of my mind and I don't want to find a positive strand out of this. There is no positive. And, again, it's horses for courses. Their argument has equally valid merit for them. There's no right and wrong in it.
Absolutely, and it suits my personality pretty well, so I can align with you on that front. But amor fati is one of the ones I haven't got on with too well. For me, it's a sense of saying, okay, I can take a positive out of the situation, but if we take it into literal terms of loving fate, I think that could just be projecting, something unbelievably positive on a situation in which I only want to take a strand of positivity. Obviously, the principle comes down to how you apply it, but obviously in all the examples that you hear is literally, laughing about the burning building or restaurant, and smiling and showing people, right? So I'm not sure how you've managed to recontextualize that to apply it to a modern day circumstance. Would you say that you've kind of just softened the tone of it a little bit?
A little bit, yeah. The love of fate is maybe a little bit extreme. But again, that's the beauty of it, because you can take your level of, tolerance for the word love might change as the years go on, and you might lean into it a little bit more. Thomas Edison famously, his whole factory burnt down. I talked about it on my podcast today, and he's a famous Stoic, and his factory burnt down, but his life's work inside in the factory. And his son, who was like crestfallen at looking at this, the family's legacy going in flames, and he said to the son, go get your mother and gather all her friends. They're never going to see a fire this amazing again. And it's like, I don't think I'm quite there.
Yeah.
I think I still would issue quite a few expletives.
Yeah, I think I can relate to that as well. But sometimes the most extreme examples are the one that help us the most to understand the context, and like you said, then you can just apply the meaning that you take away from it. Are there any other ones that you lean on quite heavily?
We touched on the start over is quite a big one for me, and it's something I try and do. Look, we all have shit days, we all have resistance in our day, and our day rarely goes to plan. Like, we rarely wake up in the morning, plan out this day, and then execute on the perfect day. We have the perfect food, we have the perfect mood, we balance our blood sugar levels to the perfect, I'm not sure if you played around with Super Sapiens, it balances blood sugar levels and gets you optimum levels for performance, but it's like, this is a witchcraft. It's like, how do you keep your energy levels totally at the right point of where you need them for each task? And it's an impossibility. So you're going to encounter resistance in the day, and the day isn't going to go as well as you want. And it's this idea of, okay, just because I've had a really bad first half to the day doesn't mean that second half to the day can't be phenomenal. It's just this start over mindset. And, I've been in the gym and, 25 minutes into a 60-minute session, and it's the worst workout I've ever had. I'm just like, I just can't, the music shit, people are annoying me, I can't get on any of the machines I want, I feel terrible, I'm like, I'm going home. And then it's like, okay, you've 35 minutes left in this workout, just start over. Like, just because the last 25 minutes have been the worst 25 minutes ever doesn't mean the next 35 minutes can't be the greatest 35 minutes ever. And it's helped me so much, because so many times I've been halfway through a session, it's been crap, and I flicked the switch and the second half has been brilliant. So many times it's been halfway through a day, halfway through a week, halfway through a holiday, halfway through a conversation, and being able to flick the switch and change it around. And that's something that I lean on every day. And other stuff that I like to do is Marcus Aurelius had this idea of the general's tent at the end of the day. And it's like, at the end of the day, the general doesn't concern himself with minutia. The general's not too concerned about, the recoil on a specific gun, or how a specific fight went. He's more concerned about the overall tactics of a battle plan. So it's like zooming out and moving the pieces around your war board and saying, okay, if I zoom out and look at everything that's going on, can I arrange like my life in a different way? Like, I'm not getting caught up on the fight I had with my girlfriend or the time where maybe I wasn't as engaged as I should have been with my dad. It's like, can I zoom out and do something differently? Can I structure my day a little bit differently? And it's by looking at today, it's like, what can I learn from what I've done today to bring into tomorrow and try and improve tomorrow a little bit? So it's just this idea of hovering out of yourself and almost viewing your activities that day in the third person and saying, okay, let's improve on today, tomorrow. And I like that one an awful lot as well. And I think I have them just kind of sprinkled into my day, and oftentimes I don't know.
Yeah, no, I love that. I completely agree. And I feel that there's been many different learnings and principles that I've come across. And, you know, it's not that one applies to your life fundamentally. Maybe memento mori is one of them that always will. But there's ones that you take in different times of your life and ones that seem more applicable than others. Like you said, amorphosity might be more, you know, easier to apply right now in a challenging situation, but it might not be so much. But it's interesting to hear that. And something else I heard you say on a podcast recently was on the topic of society being a little bit softer than what it used to be. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. And it's something that I've contemplated as well. So I'm curious, A, to hear your thoughts, and B, what you feel that maybe a potential solution could be.
Yeah, I'm big on this on the podcast. I've been pushing this idea of do hard things, do difficult tasks. Like we've engineered this society for ourselves where everything's too easy. You know, rooms are perfectly lit at the perfect temperature. We're almost never, boredom doesn't exist anymore. It's like you're at a shop in a lineup and the lineup's like 20 seconds long. It's like, okay, cool. I can watch 2 TikTok videos in 20 seconds. Like, we've alleviated boredom. We've alleviated extremes of temperature. We've alleviated, you know, discomfort in the commute. Like, our life is just too easy. And this has all happened in the last 100 years, post-industrial revolution. But again, if you zoom out and you look at the totality of the evolution of our species, the last 100 years is quite a small part of that total evolution. Our ancestral bodies that we've inherited were not too well set up for the environment we now find ourselves in. Our ancestral bodies were designed to be exposed to extremes, to be exposed to difficult tasks. We're meant to lift heavy things. We're meant to go long periods without food. We're meant to, you know, be exposed to light. We're meant to have our feet on the ground. We're meant to get cold in the water. And it's when we do all these things, they recharge us, I think, at like almost a level of our soul or a cellular level. It sounds corny and cliched, but it's only when you start doing the stuff that you go, holy shit, it feels like I should be doing this. Like when I get into the sauna and I spend like a half an hour at 56, 57 degrees, like, it's crap. I don't want to be in the sauna at 57 degrees. The last 10 minutes is like, get me anywhere but this place right now. Like, I do not want to be here. But when you get out of the sauna and then you're chilling out that evening reading a book at room temperature, it's like, oh my God, this feels amazing. Like, the breeze coming through the window, there's a different appreciation for it. So it's almost like doing hard things creates a space for enjoyment. And I found this on the bike anecdotally, and it's only when I've sit to journal and reflect on this stuff that I started kind of piecing together this hypothesis. But days when I've been out on the bike and it's, you know, I used to live in Toronto and I'd be out on the bike in -4, -5 degrees, and it's like I've 5 hours to do, and I'm looking down going like 5 hours in -5, like what the hell? My water bottles are frozen into the cage, my hands are frozen. It's just totally miserable beyond comprehension. And then I come in from the ride, have a shower, put on some warm clothes, get a duvet on the couch, have a sandwich and some tea, and watch Netflix. And it's like, that Netflix show has never like been as good. That cup of tea has never tasted as good. If I just got up out of bed, played video games all day, and then watched that Netflix show, it would be totally different experience. So the lens just completely changes, or the perspective on that changes. And that's something I've noticed over and over again. Like, if I'm lucky enough to live beside the Irish Sea, and I'll try and jump in most days into the cold Irish Sea. But when you get out of that and you have like a cup of tea or a coffee when you get out of there, it's like, oh my God, this is the nicest cup of tea I've ever had, because you're shivering after it. So it's like doing hard things creates that space for enjoyment. Have you experienced that?
I have. And before I go into my experience, I want to ask you a question that I get a lot from, and it's mainly kickback, is that someone might look at you, Anthony, and say, well, you're experiencing these challenges with your mother's health, you've got a lot on, why make your life any harder when there's already challenges coming your way?
I don't think I'd describe it as harder. It's like, yeah, if you ever fly in the airplane, they say, in the case of an emergency, put your own mask on first. And, I'm not a good person to be around unless I'm centered. And this stuff centers me. Like if, there's me, my mom, my dad, my sister, and my mom's in hospital at the moment. And my dad, he's retired and he doesn't have the mobility and stuff that he used to. So it's like, okay, step up, be the man of the house. And it's like, well, how do you be that? Well, if I'm this like fat, shriveled up, low libido, low energy dude who's slithering around the place, is like, well, that's not what the man of the house is. Like, it's, it's square the shoulders, make decisions, have confidence, have energy, have like a resilience about you that you can take some hardships, that you can take some hits and still keep moving forward. And like, it creates a momentum, like getting into the sea and shivering for 20 minutes. Like there's almost like a metaphor for that in life, because it's like you get in there, it's hard, but you're still doing it anyway. And it's like, I've never accomplished anything in my life that's just been smooth. Like I'm on episode 520 on the podcast. It's like, how many of those episodes were absolutely terrible? Like a lot, like quite a lot. How many times my microphone didn't work? How many times was I like hungover or sick or injured and crashed my bike, but still had to do the podcast anyway? Like, we need to move past adversity in life. You need to keep moving past it to get to anywhere that's worth getting to. I've never got to somewhere worth getting to without friction. So sitting in cold water gives me that resilience to move past friction. And I can take that down to other areas of my life and go, okay, well, this is a hard day I'm having, but it's not as hard as the time I crashed in Detroit and I had a collapsed lung, broke my shoulder, and had to drive 6 hours to the hospital in Toronto. That was a shit day. Now this is not, I have a headache, it's not as bad as that day. And you can benchmark experiences against the other. But for people like, and I look at friends who are like, I don't want to pick on the real private school kids, but I look at some of my friends who came through private school, and then I had a brilliant guest on the podcast actually that answers this perfectly. I had Paddy Houlihan. He's an ex-UFC fighter, came up with Conor McGregor. They were like homeboys back in the day. If you want to talk about like a vision, we'll get into the stories he was telling me about Conor McGregor and vision and manifesting, which are unbelievable. But he's from a really working class area, like as tough as you can imagine, like one of the most working class areas in the country, and probably one of the most working class areas in Europe. So he said in the school he was in, you're in from an early age, and it's like adversity straight away. It's like a kid coming over, like you're 6 years old, and he punches you in the face, your nose is bloody, you're going home and to your parents and you're like, I've got a bloody nose, and your dad's like, well, you know what you got to do, you got to fight him tomorrow. That's how you get rid of the bloody nose. He's like, it's kill or be killed in the environment he's in. He's like on the streets, in the school. So I contrast the environment he was in to some of my friends who went to private school and then they went to sort of quite polished universities, and then they're 25, 26 years old and they get in a fight in a nightclub, somebody bumps into them. It's the first time in their life they've ever encountered this adversity, and they get hit in the head by somebody, and you're talking to them the next day and it's like their world has ended. They're like, I was attacked in a nightclub last night, and it's like 25 years old and it's the first time they've ever faced any adversity in their life, and it's crippling for them. It's, they have, fear of going back out to nightclubs again. They have, social anxiety off the back of this. They have a distrust of people off the back of this because they haven't built that resilience. But you take someone like Paddy Houlihan, it's just like, you know what, it's part of life. I can take hits and I can keep moving forward all day long. I've been doing it since I was a kid. And it's an extreme example, but it kind of illustrates that we can build a resilience. It's a learned skill. And it's also a learned helplessness on the far end of that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, and I definitely haven't had that early experience of life. But if I'm completely honest, it's very rare that things on a day-to-day basis will faze me, and it's not that my life is free of stress. It's that I do my best to encounter pretty difficult things, and I think the physical challenges are the ones that I enjoy the most. I was recently running with my girlfriend in Malta. The heat was intense, and we're both struggling to breathe with the humidity and everything, but she was like, I never want to do that again. I was like, I want to go out tomorrow. Like, I love putting myself in those environments, and I don't think I'm fortunate that it was more of an intuitive thing, and it's kind of the thing that I found that was able to give me an advantage. But yeah, I think that if I looked back and did the reverse engineering, a lot of why I don't see problems as problems, I just see them as, situations in which I need to find a resolution for, is partly down to the fact that, unless something is really like life threatening, it's not really something, it's just a situation I need to resolve. So yeah, I can absolutely say that that's my experience. But I know that you are short of time, so I don't want to hold you for much longer, but I do definitely want to do a round two, so I feel like we could spend another 2 hours here, Anthony. But with that being said, if people want to listen to the podcast and reach out to you, where can they find you?
The podcast is Roadman Cycling Podcast, so I think that's on anywhere where you get your podcasts. So what do they say? Some good podcasting channels and plenty of bad ones. Instagram is probably the easiest place to find me. I think it's roadman.cycling over on Instagram, and the website is just roadmancycling.com. But the podcast is the best place to kind of tune in. It's the mission hub. So I'm 6 days a week there, and don't be deterred by the name Roadman Cycling Podcast. I'd say less than 10% of the conversations are actually about cycling. It's normally like about just dealing with. Actually, you know what? I'll finish with the Conor McGregor story for you because it's brilliant. And my phone's already ringing, but I'm just like, fuck it, this is a cool story. So I had Paddy Houlihan on the podcast. Amazing guest if you can get him on the podcast. So he came up, him and Conor McGregor were like homeboys, started out 16 together, and they'd be going to training. And this is like the power of creating a vision and manifesting. So this was before mixed martial arts was even recognized as a sport, really. There was no public awareness of it. It was a small underground community. I think Dana White bought the rights for UFC for like $1 million or something like that. Like, it's $1 billion company now, and he bought it for like $1 million. So there's Paddy Houlihan and Conor McGregor, and they're fighting in like the back of a community center, this dingy little room. They have no headgear, they have no gloves, they have no safety equipment, nothing. There's only a few of them fighting there. So they're on the way to training one day, and Conor texts Paddy, and he's like, Paddy, like, have you got any money for petrol? And he's like, no, I've no money. He's like, can you put some money off your mom for petrol? And he's like, I'll try and get a €5 for petrol. So they're in the car, and it's like a bust out Fiat Punto, like mismatched doors, and it's a ball of shit. Like, and Paddy said to Conor, like this is depressing. Like we've no money for petrol. Like, the car's probably not taxed or insured. It's like, what are we doing? Like, we're unemployed. We're calling ourselves pretending we're athletes. And Conor said to him, Paddy, this is not a Fiat Punto. This is a Ferrari. And he's like, we're not in Dublin. We're on the strip in Vegas. And we're not going into training. It's fight night. And tonight, I'm getting paid $100 million for this fight. And Paddy's just like, Conor, you have brain damage. Like, you've lost your mind, my friend. So fast forward 10, 15 years, and Paddy is in a hotel room. Phone dings, and it's like Conor going, hey, I'm downstairs. And he walks downstairs. The hotel's in Vegas. He walks outside. McGregor picks him up. Ferrari. Gets into the car, and they're driving to the MGM Grand that night. McGregor's fighting Mayweather, $100 million for one fight one night, and he's like, we fucking dreamt it into reality.
That's insane.
And it's like, it's the power of having a vision. Like, he's like a madman, but it's also the power of having like a vision.
I couldn't think of anything better to finish off with. Anthony Walsh, thank you so much for being on here.
Elliot, thank you very much, my friend.